Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Alice's Stories. We now return to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, Part 2. Chapter 24. Gossip. In order that we may start afresh and go to Meg's wedding with free minds, it will be well to begin with a little gossip about the Marches. And here let me premise that if any of the elders think there is too much lovering in the story, as I fear they may, I'm not afraid the young folks will make that objection. I can only say with Mrs. March, what can you expect when I have 4 gay girls in the house and a dashing young neighbor over the way? The 3 years that have passed have brought but few changes to the quiet family. The war is over, and Mr. March safely at home, busy with his books and the small parish which found in him a minister by nature as by grace, a quiet, studious man, rich in the wisdom that is better than learning, the charity which calls all mankind brother, the piety that blossoms into character, making it august and lovely. These attributes, in spite of poverty and the strict integrity which shut him out from the more worldly successes, attracted to him many admirable persons, as naturally as sweet herbs draw bees, and as naturally he gave them the honey into which 50 years of hard experience had distilled no bitter drop. Earnest young men found the gray-headed scholar as young at heart as they. Thoughtful or troubled women instinctively brought their doubts to him, sure of finding the gentlest sympathy, the wisest counsel. Sinners told their sins to the pure-hearted old man, and were both rebuked and saved. Gifted men found a companion in him. Ambitious men caught glimpses of nobler ambitions than their own. And even worldlings confessed that his beliefs were beautiful and true, although they wouldn't pay. To outsiders, the 5 energetic women seemed to rule the house, and so they did in many things. But the quiet scholar, sitting amongst his books, was still the head of the family, the household conscience, anchor, and comforter, for to him the busy, anxious women always turned in troublous times, finding him in the truest sense of those sacred words, husband and father. The girls gave their hearts into their mother's keeping, their souls into their fathers, and to both parents who lived and labored so faithfully for them. They gave a love that grew with their growth, and bound them tenderly together by the sweetest tie which blesses life and outlives death. Mrs. March is as brisk and cheery, though rather grayer, than when we saw her last, and just now so absorbed in Meg's affairs that the hospitals and homes, still full of wounded boys and soldiers' widows, decidedly missed the motherly missionaries' visits. John Brooke did his duty manfully for a year, got wounded, was sent home, and not allowed to return. He received no stars or bars, but he deserved them, for he cheerfully risked all he had, and life and love are very precious when both are in full bloom. Perfectly resigned to his discharge, he devoted himself to getting well, preparing for business, and earning a home for Meg, with the good sense and sturdy independence that characterized him. He refused Mr. Lawrence's more generous offers and accepted the place of bookkeeper, feeling better satisfied to begin with an honestly earned salary than by running any risks with borrowed money. Meg had spent the time in working as well as waiting, growing womanly in character, wise in housewifely arts, and prettier than ever, for love is a great beautifier. She had her girlish ambitions and hopes, and felt some disappointment at the humble way in which the new life must begin. Ned Muffet had just married Sally Gardiner, and Meg couldn't help contrasting their fine house and carriage, many gifts, and splendid outfit with her own, secretly wishing she could have the same. But somehow envy and discontent soon vanished when she thought of all the patient love and labor John had put into the little home awaiting her. And when they sat together in the twilight, talking over their small plans, the future always grew so beautiful and bright that she forgot Sally's splendor and felt herself the richest, happiest girl in Christendom. Joe never went back to Aunt March, for the old lady took such a fancy to Amy that she bribed her with the offer of drawing lessons from one of the best teachers going. And for the sake of this advantage, Amy would have served a far harder mistress. So she gave her mornings to duty, her afternoons to pleasure, and prospered finely. Jo meantime devoted herself to literature, and Beth, who remained delicate long after the fever was a thing of the past. Not an invalid exactly, but never again the rosy, healthy creature she had been, yet always hopeful, happy, and serene, and busy with the quiet duties she loved. Everyone's friend and an angel in the house, long before those who loved her most had learned to know it. As long as the Spread Eagle paid her $1 a column for her rubbish, as she called it, Jo felt herself a woman of means, and spun her little romances diligently. But great plans fermented in her busy brain and ambitious mind, and the old tin kitchen in the garret held a slowly increasing pile of blotted manuscript, which was one day to place the name of March upon the roll of fame. Laurie, having dutifully gone to college to please his grandfather, was now getting through it in the easiest possible manner to please himself. A universal favorite, thanks to money, manners, much talent, and the kindest heart that ever got its owner into scrapes by trying to get other people out of them. He stood in great danger of being spoiled, and probably would have been, like many another promising boy, if he had not possessed a talisman against evil in the memory of the kind old man who was bound up in his success, the motherly friend who watched over him as if he were her son, and last but not least, by any means, the knowledge that 4 innocent girls loved, admired, and believed in him with all their hearts. Being only a glorious human boy, of course, he frolicked and flirted, grew dandified, aquatic, sentimental, or gymnastic, as college fashions ordained, hazed and was hazed, talked slang, and more than once came perilously near suspension and expulsion. But as high spirits and the love of fun were the causes of these pranks, he always managed to save himself by frank confession, honorable atonement, or the irresistible power of persuasion which he possessed in perfection. In fact, He rather prided himself on his narrow escapes, and liked to thrill the girls with graphic accounts of his triumphs over wrathful tutors, dignified professors, and vanquished enemies. The men of my class were heroes in the eyes of the girls, who never wearied of the exploits of our fellows, and were frequently allowed to bask in the smiles of these great creatures when Laurie brought them home with him. Amy especially enjoyed this high honor, and became quite a belle among them, for her ladyship early felt and learned to use the gift of fascination with which she was endowed. Meg was too much absorbed in her private and particular John. Meg was too much absorbed in her private and particular John to care for any other laws of creation. Meg was too much absorbed in her private and particular John to care for any other laws of creation, and Beth too shy to do more than peep at them and wonder how Amy dared to order them about so. But Jo felt quite in her own element, and found it very difficult to refrain from imitating the gentle manly attitudes, phrases, and feats which seemed more natural to her than the decorums prescribed for young ladies. They all liked Jo immensely, but never fell in love with her, though very few escaped without paying the tribute of a sentimental sigh or two at Amy's shrine. And speaking of sentiment brings us very naturally to the dovecote. What?
Dovecote.
Dovecote, a shelter with nests, holes for domesticated pigeons. A pigeoner. And speaking of sentiment brings us very naturally to the dovecote. This was the name of the little brown house Mr. Brooke had prepared for Meg's first home. Laurie had christened it, saying it was highly appropriate to the gentle lovers who went on together like a pair of turtle doves, with first a bill and then a coo. It was a tiny house with a little garden behind and a lawn about as big as a pocket handkerchief in the front. Here Meg went to have a fountain, shrubbery, and a profusion of lovely flowers, though just at present the fountain was represented by a weather-beaten urn, very like a dilapidated slop bowl. The shrubbery consisted of several young larches, undecided whether to live or die, and the profusion of flowers was merely hinted by regiments of sticks to show where seeds were planted. But inside it was altogether charming, and the happy bride saw no fault from garret to cellar. To be sure, the hall was so narrow it was fortunate that they had no piano, for one never could have been got in the whole. The dining room was so small that 6 people were a tight fit, and the kitchen stairs seemed built for the express purpose of precipitating both servants and china pell-mell into the coal bin. But once get used to these slight blemishes, and nothing could be more complete, for good sense and good taste had presided over the furnishing, and the result was highly satisfactory. There were no marble-top tables, long mirrors, or lace curtains in the little parlor, but simple furniture, plenty of books, and a fine picture or two, a stand of flowers in the bay window, and scattered all about the pretty gifts which came from friendly hands, and were the fairer for the loving messages they brought. I don't think the Parian psyche. I don't think the Parian psyche Laurie gave lost any of its beauty because John put up the bracket it stood upon, that any upholsterer could have draped the plain muslin curtains more gracefully than Amy's artistic hand, or that any storeroom was ever better provided with good wishes, merry words, and happy hopes than that in which Jo and her mother put away Meg's few boxes, barrels, and bundles, and I am morally certain that the spandy new kitchen never could have looked so cozy and neat if Hannah had not arranged every pot and pan a dozen times over, and laid the fire all ready for lighting the minute Mrs. Brooke came home. I also doubt if any young matron ever began life with so rich a supply of dusters, holders, and piece bags, for Beth made enough to last till the silver wedding came round, and invented 3 different kinds of dishcloths for the express service of the bridal china. People who hire all these things done for them never knew what they lose, for the homeliest tasks get beautified if loving hands do them, and Meg found so many proofs of this that everything in her small nest, from the kitchen roller to the silver vase on her parlor table, was eloquent of home love and tender forethought. What happy times they had planning together, what solemn shopping excursions, what funny mistakes they made, and what shouts of laughter arose over Laurie's ridiculous bargains. In his love of jokes, this young gentleman, though nearly through college, was as much of a boy as ever. His last whim had been to bring with him on his weekly visits some new, useful, and ingenious. His last whim had been to bring with him on his weekly visits some new, useful, and ingenious article for the young housekeeper. Now a bag of remarkable clothespins. Next, a wonderful nutmeg grater which fell to pieces at the first trial. A knife cleaner that spoiled all the knives, or a sweeper that picked the nap neatly off the carpet and left the dirt. Labor-saving soap that took the skin off one's hands. Infallible cements which stuck firmly to nothing but the fingers of the deluded buyer. And every kind of tinware, from a toy savings bank for odd pennies to a wonderful boiler which would wash articles in its own steam with every prospect of exploding in the process. In vain Meg begged him to stop. John laughed at him, and Jo called him Mr. Toodles. He was possessed with a mania for patronizing Yankee ingenuity and seeing his friends fitly furnished forth, so each week beheld some fresh absurdity. Everything was done at last, even to Amy's arranging different colored soaps to match the different colored rooms, and Beth setting the table for the first meal. Are you satisfied? Does it seem like home? And do you feel as if you should be happy here? Asked Mrs. March, as she and her daughter went through the new kingdom arm in arm, for just then they seemed to cling together more tenderly than ever. Yes, Mother, perfectly satisfied, thanks to you all, and so happy that I can't talk about it, with a look that was far better than words. If she only had a servant or two, it would be all right, said Amy, coming out of the parlor where she had been trying to decide whether the bronze Mercury looked best on the whatnot or the mantelpiece. Mother and I have talked that over, and I have made up my mind to try her way first. There will be so little to do that with Lottie to run my errands and help me here and there, I shall only have enough work to keep me from getting lazy or homesick, answered Meg tranquilly. Sally Muffet has fall, began Amy. If Meg had fall, the house wouldn't hold them, and Master and Missus would have to camp in the garden, broke in Joe, who, enveloped in a big blue pinafore, was giving the last polish to the door handles. Sally isn't a poor man's wife, and many maids are in keeping with a fine establishment. Meg and John begin humbly, but I have a feeling that there will be quite as much happiness in the little house as in the big one. It's a great mistake for young girls like Meg to leave themselves nothing to do but dress, give orders, and gossip. When I was first married, I used to long for my new clothes to wear out or get torn so that I might have the pleasure of mending them, for I got heartily sick of doing fancy work and tending my pocket handkerchief. Why didn't you go into the kitchen and make messes, as Sally says she does to amuse herself, though they never turn out well and the servants laugh at her, said Meg. I did after a while, not to mess but to learn of Hannah how things should be done, that my servants need not laugh at me. It was play then, but there came a time when I was truly grateful that I not only possessed the will, but the power to cook wholesome food for my little girls, and help myself when I could no longer afford to hire help. You begin at the other end, Meg dear, but the lessons you learn now will be of use to you by and by when John is a richer man. For the mistress of a house, however splendid, should know how work ought to be done if she wishes to be well and honestly served. Yes, mother, I'm sure of that, said Meg, listening respectfully to the little lecture, for the best of women will hold forth upon all absorbing subject of housekeeping. For the best of women will hold forth upon the all-absorbing subject of housekeeping. Do you know I like this room most of all in my baby house? Added Meg a minute after, as they went upstairs and she looked into her well-stored linen closet. Beth was there, laying the snowy piles smoothly on the shelves and exulting over the goodly array. All three laughed as Meg spoke. For that linen closet was a joke. You see, having said that if Meg married that Brooke, she shouldn't have a cent of her money. Aunt March was rather in a quandary when time had appeased her wrath and made her repent her vow. She never broke her word and was much exercised in her mind how to get round it, and at last devised a plan whereby she could satisfy herself. Mrs. Carroll, Florence's mamma, was ordered to buy, have made, and marked a generous supply of house and table linen, and send it as her present, all of which was faithfully done, but the secret leaked out and was greatly enjoyed by the family, for Aunt March tried to look utterly unconscious and insisted that she could give nothing but the old-fashioned pearls long promised to the first bride. That's a housewifely taste which I am glad to see. That's a housewifely taste which I am glad to see. I had a young friend who set up housekeeping with 6 sheets, but she had finger bowls for company, and that satisfied her, said Mrs. March, patting the damask tablecloths with a truly feminine appreciation of their finesse. Fineness. With a truly feminine appreciation of their fineness. I haven't a single finger bowl, but this is a set out that will last me all my days, Hannah says, and Meg looked quite contented, as well she might. A tall, broad-shouldered young fellow with a cropped head, a felt basin of a hat, and a flyaway coat came tramping down the road at a great pace, walked over the low fence without stopping to open the gate, straight up to Mrs. March, with both hands out and a hearty, "Here I am, mother. Yes, it's all right." The last words were in answer to the look the elderly gave him, a kindly questioning look which the handsome eyes met so frankly that the little ceremony closed as usual with a motherly kiss. "For Mrs. John Brooke, with the maker's congratulations and compliments. Bless you, Beth. What a refreshing spectacle you are, Joe. Amy, you are getting altogether too handsome for a single lady." As Laurie spoke, he delivered a brown paper parcel to Meg, piled Beth's hair ribbon, stared at Joe's bib pinafore, and fell into an attitude of mock rapture before Amy, then shook hands all round, and everybody began to talk. "Where is John?" asked Meg anxiously. "Stopped to get the license for tomorrow, ma'am." "Which side won the last match, Teddy?" inquired Joe, who persisted in feeling an interest in manly sports despite her 19 years. "Ours, of course. Wish you'd been there to see." "How is the lovely Miss Randall?" asked Amy with a significant smile. "More cruel than ever. Don't you see how I'm pinning away?" And Laurie gave his broad chest a sounding slap and heaved a melodramatic sigh. "Oh." "What's the last joke? Undo the bundle and see, Meg," said Beth, eyeing the knobby parcel with curiosity. "It's a useful thing to have in the house in case of fire or thieves," observed Laurie, as a watchman's rattle appeared, amid the laughter of the girls. "Any time when John is away and you get frightened, Mrs. Meg, just swing that out of the front window and it will rouse the neighborhood in a jiffy. Nice thing, isn't it?" And Laurie gave them a sample of its powers that made them cover up their ears. "There's gratitude for you. And speaking of gratitude, reminds me to mention that you may thank Hannah for saving your wedding cake from destruction. I saw it going into your house as I came by, and if she hadn't defended it manfully, I'd have had a pick at it, for it looked like a remarkably plummy one." "I wonder if you will ever grow up, Laurie," said Meg in a matronly tone. "I'm doing my best, ma'am, but can't get much higher, I'm afraid, as 6 feet is about all men can do in these degenerate days," responded the young gentleman, whose head was about level with the little chandelier. "I suppose it would be profanation to eat anything in this spick and span bower, so as I'm tremendously hungry, I propose an adjournment," he added presently. "Mother and I are going to wait for John. There are some last things to settle," said Meg, bustling away. "Beth and I are going over to Kitty Bryant's to get more flowers for tomorrow," added Amy, trying a picturesque hat over her picturesque curls and enjoying the effect as much as anybody. "Come, Joe, don't desert a fellow. I'm in such a state of exhaustion I can't get home without help. Don't take off your apron. Whatever you do, it's peculiarly becoming," said Laurie, as Joe bestowed his especial aversion in her capacious pocket and offered her arm to support his feeble steps. "Now, Teddy, I want to talk seriously to you about tomorrow," began Joe, as they strolled away together. "You must promise to behave well and not cut up any pranks and spoil our plans. Not a prank. And don't say funny things when we ought to be sober. I never do. You are the one for that. And I implore you not to look at me during the ceremony. I shall certainly laugh if you do. You won't see me. You'll be crying so hard that the thick fog round you will obscure the prospect. I never cry unless for some great affliction. Such as fellows going to college, eh? Cut in Laurie with a suggestive laugh. Don't be a peacock. I only moaned a trifle to keep the girls company. Exactly, I say, Joe. How is Grandpa this week? Pretty amiable? Very. Why, have you got into a scrape and want to know how he'll take it? Asked Joe rather sharply. Now, Joe, do you think I'd look your mother in the face and say, all right, if it wasn't? And Laura stopped short with an injured air. No, I don't. Then don't go and be suspicious. I only want some money, said Laurie, walking on again, appeased by her hearty tone. You spend a great deal, Teddy. Bless you, I don't spend it. It spends itself somehow, and it's gone before I know it. You are so generous and kind-hearted that you let people borrow and can't say no to anyone. We heard about Henshaw and all you did for him. If you always spent money in that way, no one would blame you, said Joe warmly. Oh, he made a mountain out of a molehill. You wouldn't have me let that fine fellow work himself to death just for want of a little help, when he is worth a dozen of us lazy chaps, would you? Of course not, but I don't see the use of your having 17 waistcoats, endless neckties, and a new hat every time you come home. I thought you got over the dandy period, but every now and then it breaks out in a new spot. Just now it's the fashion to be hideous, to make your head look like a scrubbing brush, wear a straitjacket, orange gloves, and clumping square-toed boots. If it was cheap ugliness, I'd say nothing, but it costs as much as the other, and I don't get any satisfaction out of it. Laurie threw back his head and laughed so heartily at this attack that the felt hat fell off and Joe walked on it, which insult only afforded him an opportunity for expatiating on the advantages of a rough and ready costume. Expatiating. Speak or write at length or in detail. Expatiate, hold forth about. Which insult only afforded him an opportunity for expatiating on the advantages of a rough and ready costume, as he folded up the maltreated hat and stuffed it into his pocket. Don't lecture me anymore. Don't lecture anymore. There's a good soul. I have enough all through the week and like to enjoy myself when I come home. I'll get myself up regardless of expense tomorrow and be satisfaction to my friends. I'll leave you in peace if you'll only let your hair grow. I'm not aristocratic, but I do object to being seen with a person who looks like a young prize fighter, observed Joe severely. This unassuming style promotes study. That's why we adopt it, returned Laurie, who certainly could not be accused of vanity, having voluntarily sacrificed a handsome curly crop to the demand of quarter-inch long stubble. By the way, Joe, I think that little Parker is really getting desperate about Amy. He talks of her constantly, writes poetry and moons about in a most suspicious manner. He'd better nip his little passion in the bud, hadn't he? Added Laurie, in a confidential elderly brother tone after a minute's silence. Of course he had. We don't want any more marrying in this family for years to come. Mercy on us, what are the children thinking of? And Joe looked as much scandalized as if Amy and little Parker were not yet in their teens. It's a fast age, and I don't know what we are coming to, ma'am. They are a mere infant. You are a mere infant, but you'll go next, Joe, and we'll be left lamenting, said Laurie, shaking his head over the degeneracy of the times. Don't be alarmed, I'm not one of the agreeable sort. Nobody will want me, and it's a mercy, for there should always be one old maid in the family. You won't give anyone a chance, said Laurie, with a sidelong glance and a little more color than before in his sunburned face. You won't show the soft side of your character, and if a fellow gets a peep at it by accident and can't help showing that he likes it, you treat him as Mr. Grummage did her sweetheart. Throw cold water over him and get so thorny no one dares touch or look at you. I don't like that sort of thing. I'm too busy to be worried with nonsense, and I think it's dreadful to break up family so. Now don't say any more about it. Meg's wedding has turned all our heads, and we talk of nothing but lovers and such absurdities. I don't wish to get cross, so let's change the subject. And Joe looked quite ready to fling cold water on the slightest provocation. Whatever his feelings might have been, Laurie found a vent for them in a long, low whistle and the fearful prediction as they parted at the gate. Mark my words, Joe, you'll go next. Chapter 25, The First Wedding. The June roses over the porch were awake bright and early that morning, rejoicing with all their hearts in the cloudless sunshine, like friendly little neighbors as they were. Quite flushed with excitement were their ruddy faces, as they swung in the wind, whispering to one another what they had seen. For some peeped in at the dining room windows where the feast was spread. Some climbed up to nod and smile at the sisters as they dressed the bride. Others waved a welcome to those who came and went on various errands in garden, porch, and hall and all, from the rosiest full-bloom flower to the palest baby bud, offered their tribute of beauty and fragrance to the gentle mistress who had loved and tended them so long. Meg looked very like a rose herself, for all that was best and sweetest in heart and soul seemed to bloom into her face that day, making it fair and tender, with a charm more beautiful than beauty. Neither silk, lace, nor orange flowers would she have. I don't want a fashionable wedding, but only those about me whom I love, and to them I wish to look and be my familiar self. So she made her wedding gown herself, sewing into it the tender hopes and innocent romances of a girlish heart. Her sisters braided up her pretty hair, and the only ornaments she wore were the lilies of the valley, which her John liked best of all the flowers that grew. You do look just like our own dear Meg, only so very sweet and lovely that I should hug you if it wouldn't crumple your dress, cried Amy, surveying her with delight when all was done. Then I am satisfied, but please hug and kiss me, everyone, and don't mind my dress. I want a great many crumples of this sort put into it today. And Meg opened her arms to her sisters, who clung about her with April faces for a minute, feeling that the new love had not changed the old. Now I'm going to tie John's cravat for him, and then to stay a few minutes with Father quietly in the study. And Meg ran down to perform these little ceremonies, and then to follow her mother wherever she went, conscious that in spite of the smiles on the motherly face, there was a secret sorrow hid in the motherly heart at the flight of the first bird from the nest. As the younger girls stand together, giving the last touches to their simple toilet, it may be a good time to tell of a few changes which 3 years have wrought in their appearance, for all are looking their best just now. Jo's angles are much softened. She has learned to carry herself with ease, if not grace. The curly crop has lengthened into a thick coil, more becoming to the small head atop of the tall figure. There is a fresh color in her brown cheeks, a soft shine in her eyes, and the only gentle words fall from her sharp tongue today. And only gentle words fall from her sharp tongue today. Beth has grown slender, pale, and more quiet than ever. The beautiful, kind eyes are larger, and in them lies an expression that saddens one, although it is not sad itself. It is the shadow of pain which touches the young face with such pathetic patience. But Beth seldom complains, and always speaks hopefully of being better soon. Amy is with truth considered the flower of the family, for at 16 she has the air and bearing of a full-grown woman, not beautiful, but possessed of that indescribable charm called grace. One saw it in the lines of her figure, the make and motion of her hands, the flow of her dress, the droop of her hair, unconscious, yet harmonious, and as attractive to many as beauty itself. Amy's nose still afflicted her, for it never would grow Grecian. So did her mouth, being too wide and having a decided chin. These offending features gave character to her whole face, but she never could see it, and consoled herself with her wonderfully fair complexion, keen blue eyes, and curls more golden and abundant than ever. All three wore suits of thin silver gray, their best gowns for the summer, with blush roses in hair and blossom, and all three looked just what they were, fresh-faced, happy-hearted girls, pausing a moment in their busy lives to read with wistful eyes the sweetest chapter in the romance of womanhood. There were to be no ceremonious performances. Everything was to be as natural and homelike as possible. So when Aunt March arrived, she was scandalized to see the bride come running to welcome and lead her in, to find the bridegroom fastening up a garland that had fallen down, and to catch a glimpse of the paternal minister marching upstairs with a grave countenance and a wine bottle under each arm. "Upon my word, here's a state of things," cried the old lady, taking the seat of honor prepared for her, and settling the folds of her lavender moire with a great rustle. "You oughtn't to be seen till the last minute, child. I'm not a show auntie, and no one is coming to stare at me, to criticize my dress, or count the cost of my luncheon. I'm too happy to care what anyone says or thinks, and I'm going to have my little wedding just as I like it. John, dear, here's your hammer." And away went Meg to help that man in his highly improper employment. Mr. Brooke didn't even say thank you, but as he stooped for the unromantic tool, he kissed his little bride behind the folding door with a look that made Aunt March whisk out her pocket handkerchief with a sudden dew in her sharp old eyes. A crash, a cry, and a laugh from Laurie, accompanied by the indecorous exclamation, "Jupiter Ammon! Joe's upset the cake again!" caused a momentary flurry, which was hardly over when a flock of cousins arrived, and the party came in, as Beth used to say when a child. "Don't let that young giant come near me. He worries me worse than mosquitoes," whispered the old lady to Amy as the room was filled and Laura's black head towered above the rest. "He has promised to be very good today, and he can be perfectly elegant if he likes," returned Amy, and gliding away to warn Hercules to beware of the dragon, which warning caused him to haunt the old lady with a devotion that nearly distracted her. There was no bridal procession, But a sudden silence fell upon the room as Mr. March and the young couple took their places under the green arch. Mother and sisters gathered close as if loath to give Meg up. The fatherly voice broke more than once, which only seemed to make the service more beautiful and solemn. The bridegroom's hand trembled visibly, and no one heard his replies. But Meg looked straight up in her husband's eyes and said, "I will," with such tender trust in her own face and voice that her mother's heart rejoiced, and Aunt March sniffed audibly. Jo did not cry, though she was very near it once, and was only saved from a demonstration by the consciousness that Laurie was staring fixedly at her with a comical mixture of merriment and emotion in his wicked black eyes. Beth kept her face hidden on her mother's shoulder, but Amy stood like a graceful statue, with a most becoming ray of sunshine touching her white forehead and the flower in her hair. It wasn't at all the thing, I'm afraid, but the minute she was fairly married, Meg cried, "The first kiss for Mommy," and turning, gave it with her heart on her lips. During the next 15 minutes, she looked more like a rose than ever, for everyone availed themselves of their privileges to the fullest extent, from Mr. Lawrence to old Hannah, who, adorned with a headdress fearfully and wonderfully made, fell upon her in the hall, crying with a sob and a chuckle, "Bless you, dearie, 100 times. The cake ain't hurt a mite, and everything looks lovely." Everybody cleared up after that and said something brilliant or tried to, which did just as well, for laughter is ready when hearts are light. There was no display of gifts, for they were already in the little house, nor was there an elaborate breakfast, but a plentiful lunch of cake and fruit, dressed with flowers. Mr. Lawrence and Aunt March shrugged and smiled at one another when water, lemonade, and coffee were found to be to only sorts of nectar which the three Hebes carried around. No one said anything till Laurie, who insisted on serving the bride, appeared before her with a loaded salver in his hand and a puzzled expression on his face. "Has Jo smashed all the bottles by accident?" he whispered. "Or am I merely laboring under a delusion that I saw some lying about loose this morning?" "No, your grandfather kindly offered us his best, and Aunt March actually sent some, but Father put away a little for Beth and dispatched the rest to the soldiers' home. You know he thinks that wine should be used only in illness, and Mother says that neither she nor her daughters will ever offer it to any young man under her roof." Meg spoke seriously and expected to see Laurie frown or laugh, but he did neither, for after a quick look at her, he said in his impetuous way, "I like that, for I've seen enough harm done to wish other women would think as you do." "You are not made wise by experience, I hope?" And there was an anxious accent in Meg's voice. "No, I give you my word for it. Don't think too well of me either. This is not one of my temptations. Being brought up where wine is as common as water and almost as harmless, I don't care for it. But when a pretty girl offers it, one doesn't like to refuse, you see. But you will, for the sake of others, if not for your own. Come, Laurie, promise and give me one more reason to call this the happiest day of my life." A demand so sudden and so serious made the young man hesitate a moment, for ridicule is often harder to bear than self-denial. Meg knew that if he gave the promise, he would keep it at all costs, and feeling her power, used it as a woman may for her friend's good. She did not speak, but she looked up at him with a face made very eloquent by happiness, and a smile which said, "No one can refuse me anything today." Laurie certainly could not, and with an answering smile, he gave her his hand, saying heartily, I promise, Mrs. Brooke. I thank you very, very much. And I drink long life to your resolution, Teddy, cried Joe, baptizing him with a splash of lemonade as she waved her glass and beamed approvingly upon him. So the toast was drunk, the pledge made, and loyally kept in spite of many temptations, for with instinctive wisdom the girls seized the happy moment to do their friend a service for which he thanked them all his life. After lunch, people strolled about by twos and threes through the house and garden, enjoying the sunshine without and within. Meg and John happened to be standing together in the middle of the grass plot when Laurie was seized with an inspiration which put the finishing touch to this unfashionable wedding. All the married people take hands and dance round the new-made husband and wife, as the Germans do, while we bachelors and spinsters prance in couples outside, cried Laurie, promenading down the path with Amy with such infectious spirit and skill that everyone else followed their example without a murmur. Mr. and Mrs. March, Aunt and Uncle Carroll began it. Others rapidly joined in, even Sally Muffet, after a moment's hesitation, threw her train over her arm and whisked Ned into the ring. But the crowning joke was Mr. Lawrence and Aunt March. For when the stately old gentleman chased solemnly up to the old lady, she just tucked her cane under arm and hopped briskly away to join hands with the rest and dance about the bridal pair, while the young folks pervaded the garden like butterflies on a midsummer day. Want of breath brought the impromptu ball to a close, and then people began to go. I wish you well, my dear. I heartily wish you well, but I think you'll be sorry for it, said Aunt March to Meg, adding to the bridegroom as he led her to the carriage. You've got a treasure, young man. See that you deserve it. That is the prettiest wedding I've been to for an age, Ned, and I don't see why, for there wasn't a bit of style about it, observed Mrs. Moffat to her husband as they drove away. Laurie, my lad, if you ever want to indulge in this sort of thing, get one of those little girls to help you, and I shall be perfectly satisfied, said Mr. Lawrence, settling himself in his easy chair to rest after the excitement of the morning. I'll do my best to gratify you, sir, was Laurie's unusually dutiful reply as he carefully unpinned the posy Joe had put in his buttonhole. The little house was not far away, and the only bridal journey Meg had was the quiet walk with John from the old home to the new, when she came down looking like a pretty Quakeress in her dove-colored suit and straw bonnet tied with white. They all gathered about her to say goodbye as tenderly as if she had been going to make the grand tour. Don't feel that I am separated from you, Mommy dear, or that I love you any less for loving John so much, she said, clinging to her mother with full eyes for a moment. I shall come every day, Father, and expect to keep my old place in all your hearts, though I am married. Beth is going to be with me a great deal, and the other girls will drop in now and then to laugh at my housekeeping struggles. Thank you all for my happy wedding day. Goodbye, goodbye. They stood watching her with faces full of love and hope and tender pride as she walked away, leaning on her husband's arm, with her hands full of flowers and the June sunshine brightening her happy face. And so, Meg's married life began. Chapter 26. Artistic Attempts. It takes people a long time to learn the difference between talent and genius, especially ambitious young men and women. Amy was learning this distinction through much tribulation, for mistaken enthusiasm for inspiration. She attempted every branch of art with youthful audacity. For a long time there was a lull in the mud pie business, and she devoted herself to the finest pen and ink drawing, in which she showed such taste and skill that her graceful handiwork proved both pleasant and profitable. But overstrained eyes caused pen and ink to be laid aside for a bold attempt at poker sketching. While this attack lasted, the family lived in constant fear of a conflagration, for the odor of burning wood pervaded the house at all hours. Smoke issued from the attic and shed with alarming frequency. Red-hot pokers lay about promiscuously, and Hannah never went to bed without a pail of water and the dinner bell at her door in case of fire. Raphael's face was found boldly executed on the underside of the moulding board, and Bacchus on the head of a beer barrel. A chanting cherub adorned the cover of the sugar bucket, and attempts to portray Romeo and Juliet supplied kindling for some time. From fire to oil was a natural transition for burned fingers, and Amy fell to painting with undiminished ardor. An artist friend fitted her out with his cast-off palettes, brushes, and colors, and she daubed away, producing pastoral and marine views such as were never seen on land or sea. Her monstrosities in the way of cattle would have taken prizes at an agricultural fair, and the perilous pitching of her vessels would have produced seasickness in the most nautical observer. If the utter disregard to all known rules of shipbuilding and rigging had not convulsed him with laughter at the first glance. Swarthy boys and dark-eyed Madonnas staring at you from one corner of the studio, suggested Merrill. Oily brown shadows of faces with a lurid streak in the wrong place meant Rembrandt. Buxom ladies and dropsical infants, Rubens and Turner appeared in tempests of blue thunder, orange lightning, brown rain, and purple clouds with a tomato-colored splash in the middle, which might be the sun or a buoy, a sailor's shirt or a king's robe, as the spectator pleased. Charcoal portraits came next, and the entire family hung in a row, looking as wild and crocky as if just evoked from a coal bin. Softened into crayon sketches, they did better, for the likenesses were good, and Amy's hair, Joe's nose, Meg's mouth, and Laura's eyes were pronounced wonderfully fine. A return to clay and plaster followed, and ghostly casts of her acquaintances haunted corners of the house, or tumbled off closet shelves onto people's heads. Children were enticed in as models till their incoherent accounts of her mysterious doings caused Miss Amy to be regarded in the light of a young ogress. Her efforts in this line, however, were brought to an abrupt close by an untoward accident which quenched her ardor. Other models failing her for a time, she undertook to cast her own pretty foot, and the family were one day alarmed by an unearthly bumping and screaming, and running to the rescue, found the young enthusiast hopping wildly about the shed with her foot held fast in a pan full of plaster, which had hardened with unexpected rapidity. With much difficulty and some danger, she was dug out, for Jo was so overcome with laughter while she excavated that her knife went too far, cut the poor foot, and left a lasting memorial of one artistic attempt, at least. After this, Amy subsided, till a mania for sketching from nature set her to haunting river, field, and wood for picturesque studies, and sighing for ruins to copy. She caught endless colds sitting on damp grass to book delicious bit, composed of a stone, a stump, one mushroom, and a broken mullein stalk, or a heavenly mass of clouds that looked like a choice display of feather beds when done. She sacrificed her complexion floating on the river in the midsummer sun to study light and shade, and got a wrinkle over her nose trying after points of sight or whatever the squint and string performance is called. If genius is eternal patience, as Michelangelo affirms, Amy had some claim to the divine attribute, for she persevered in spite of all obstacles, failures, and discouragements, firmly believing that in time she should do something worthy to be called high art. She was learning, doing, and enjoying other things. Meanwhile, for she had resolved to be an attractive and accomplished woman, even if she never became a great artist. Here she succeeded better, for she was one of those happily created beings who please without effort, making friends everywhere, and take life so gracefully and easily that less fortunate souls are tempted to believe that such are born under a lucky star. Everybody liked her, for among her good gifts was tact. She had an instinctive sense of what was pleasing and proper, always said the right thing to the right person, did just what suited the time and place, and was so self-possessed that her sisters used to say, if Amy went to court without any rehearsal beforehand, she'd know exactly what to do. One of her weaknesses was a desire to move in our best society without being quite sure what the best really was. Money, position, fashionable accomplishments, and elegant manners were most desirable things in her eyes, and she liked to associate with those who possessed them, often mistaking the false for true and admiring what was not admirable. Never forgetting that by birth she was a gentle woman. She cultivated her aristocratic tastes and feelings so that when the opportunity came, she might be ready to take the place from which poverty now excluded her. My lady, as her friends called her, sincerely desired to be a genuine lady and was so at heart, but had yet to learn that money cannot buy refinement of nature, that rank does not always confer nobility, and that true breeding makes itself felt in spite of external drawbacks. I want to ask a favor of you, Mama, Amy said, coming in with an important air one day. Well, little girl, what is it? Replied her mother, in whose eyes the stately young lady still remained the baby. Our drawing class breaks up next week, and before the girls separate for the summer, I want to ask them out here for a day. They are wild to see the river, sketch the broken bridge, and copy some of the things they admire in my book. They have been very kind to me in many ways, and I am grateful, for they are all rich and I know I am poor, yet they never made any difference. Why should they? And Mrs. March put the question with what the girls called her Maria Teresa air. You know as well as I that it doesn't make a difference with nearly everyone, so don't ruffle up like a deer. motherly hen. So don't ruffle up like a dear motherly hen when your chickens get pecked by smarter birds. The ugly duckling turned out a swan, you know. And Amy smiled without bitterness, for she possessed a happy temper and hopeful spirit. Mrs. March laughed and smoothed down her maternal pride as she asked, "Well, my swan, what is your plan?" "I should like to ask the girls out to lunch next week, to take them for a drive to the places they want to see, a row on the river perhaps, and make a little artistic fete for them." "That looks feasible. What do you want for lunch? Cake, sandwiches, fruit, and coffee will be all that is necessary, I suppose." "Oh dear, no. We must have cold tongue and chicken, French chocolate, and ice cream besides. The girls are used to such things, and I want my lunch to be proper and elegant, though I do work for my living." "How many young ladies are there?" asked her mother, beginning to look sober. 12 or 14 in the class, but I dare say they won't all come." "Bless me, child, you will have to charter an omnibus to carry them about." "Why, mother, how can you think of such a thing? Not more than 6 or 8 will probably come, so I shall hire a beach wagon and borrow Mr. Lawrence's cherry bounce." Hannah's pronunciation of charabanc. "All of this will be expensive, Amy." "Not very. I've calculated the cost, and I'll pay for it myself." "Don't you think, dear, that as these girls are used to such things, and the best we can do will be nothing new, that some simpler plan would be pleasanter to them, as a change if nothing more, and much better for us than buying or borrowing what we don't need, and attempting a style not in keeping with our circumstances?" "If I can't have it as I like, I don't care to have it at all. I know that I can carry it out perfectly well if you and the girls will help a little, and I don't see why I can't if I'm willing to pay for it," said Amy with the decision which opposition was apt to change into obstinacy.
Obstinacy.
Obstinacy, the quality or condition of being obstinate, stubbornness. "I don't see why I can't if I'm willing to pay for it," said Amy, with the decision which opposition was apt to change into obstinacy. Mrs. March knew that experience was an excellent teacher, and when it was possible, she left her children to learn alone the lessons which she would gladly have made easier, if they had not objected to taking advice as much as they did salts and senna. "Very well, Amy, if your heart is set upon it, and you see your way through without too great an outlay of money, time, and temper, I'll say no more. Talk it over with the girls, and whichever way you decide, I'll do my best to help you." "Thanks, Mother. You're always so kind." And away went Amy to lay her plan before her sisters. Meg agreed at once and promised her aid, gladly offering anything she possessed, from her little house itself to her very best salt spoons. But Joe frowned upon the whole project, and would have nothing to do with it at first. "Why in the world should you spend your money worrying your family and turn the house upside down for a parcel of girls who don't care a sixpence for you? I thought you had too much pride and sense to truckle to any mortal woman just because she wears French boots and rides in a coupe," said Joe, who, being called from the tragic climax of a novel, was not in the best mood for social enterprises. "I don't truckle, and I hate being patronized as much as you do," returned Amy indignantly, for the two still jangled when such questions arose. The girls do care for me, and I for them, and there's a great deal of kindness and sense and talent among them, in spite of what you call fashionable nonsense. You don't care to make people like you, to go into good society and cultivate your manners and taste. I do, and I mean to make the most of every chance that comes. You can go through the world with your elbows out and your nose in the air and call it independence if you like. That is not my way. When Amy had wetted her tongue and freed her mind, she usually got the best of it, for she seldom failed to have common sense on her side, while Joe carried her love of liberty and hate of conventionalities to such an unlimited extent that she naturally found herself worsted in an argument. Amy's definition of Joe's idea of independence was such a good hit that both burst out laughing. And the discussion took a more amiable turn. Much against her will, Joe at length consented to sacrifice a day to Mrs. Grundy and help her sister through what she regarded as a nonsensical business. The invitations were sent, nearly all accepted, and the following Monday was set apart for the grand event. Hannah was out of humor because her week's work was deranged and prophesied that if the washing and ironing weren't done regular, nothing would go well anyways. This hitch in the mainspring of the domestic machinery had a bad effect upon the whole concern. But Amy's motto was nil desperandum, and having made up her mind what to do, she proceeded to do it in spite of all obstacles. To begin with, Hannah's cooking didn't turn out well. The chicken was tough, the tongue too salt, and the chocolate wouldn't froth properly. Then the cake and ice cost more than Amy expected. So did the wagon and various other expenses, which seemed trifling at the outset, counted up rather alarmingly afterward. Beth got a cold and took to her bed. Meg had an unusual number of callers to keep her at home, and Joe was in such a divided state of mind that her breakages, accidents, and mistakes were uncommonly numerous, serious, and trying. If it was not fair on Monday, the young ladies were to come on Tuesday, an arrangement which aggravated Joe and Hannah to the last degree. On Monday morning, the weather was in that undecided state which is more exasperating than a steady pour. It drizzled a little, shone a little, blew a little, and didn't make up its mind till it was too late for anyone else to make up theirs. Amy was up at dawn, hustling people out of their beds and through their breakfasts, that the house might be got in order. The parlor struck her as looking uncommonly shabby, but without stopping to sigh for what she had not, she skillfully made the best of what she had, arranging chairs over the worn places in the carpet, covering stains on the walls with homemade statuary which gave an artistic air to the room, as did the lovely vases of flowers Joe scattered about. The lunch looked charming, and as she surveyed it, she sincerely hoped it would taste well, and that the borrowed glass, china, and silver would get safely home again. The carriages were promised. Meg and Mother were all ready to do the honors. Beth was able to help Hannah behind the scenes. Joe had engaged to be as lively and amiable as an absent mind, an aching head, and a very decided disapproval of everybody and everything would allow. And as she warily dressed, Emily cheered herself with anticipations of the happy moment when, lunch safely over, she should drive away with her friends for an afternoon of artistic delights, for the cherry bounce and the broken ridge were her strong points. Then came the hours of suspense, during which she vibrated from parlor to pouch, from parlor to porch, while public opinion varied like the weathercock. A smart shower at 11 had evidently quenched the enthusiasm of the young ladies who were to arrive at 12, for nobody came. And at 2, the exhausted family sat down in a blaze of sunshine to consume the perishable portions of the feast, that nothing might be lost. No doubt about the weather today. They will certainly come, so we must fly round and be ready for them, said Amy as the sun woke her next morning. She spoke briskly, but in her secret soul she wished she had nothing about Tuesday. She wished she had said nothing about Tuesday, for her interest, like her cake, was getting a little stale. I can't get any lobsters, so you will have to do without salad today, said Mr. March, coming in half an hour later with an expression of placid despair. Use the chicken, then. The toughness won't matter in a salad, advised his wife. Hannah left it on the kitchen table a minute, and the kittens got at it. I'm very sorry, Amy, added Beth, who was still a patroness of cats. Then I must have a lobster, for tongue alone won't do, said Amy decidedly. Shall I rush into town and demand one? Asked Joe with the magnanimity of a martyr. Magnanimity. Good Lord. Magnanimity, the fact or condition of being magnanimous, generosity. Shall I rush into town and demand one? Asked Joe with the magnanimity of a martyr. You'd come bringing it home under your arm without any paper just to try me? I'll go myself, answered Amy, whose temper was beginning to fail. Shrouded in a thick veil and armed with a genteel traveling basket, she departed, feeling that a cool drive would soothe her ruffled spirit and fit her for the labors of the day. After some delay, the object of her desire was procured, likewise a bottle of dressing to prevent further loss of time at home, and off she drove again, well pleased with her own forethought. As the omnibus contained only one other passenger, a sleepy old lady, Amy pocketed her veil and beguiled the tedium of the way by trying to find out where all her money had gone to. So busy was she with her card full of refractory figures that she did not observe a newcomer who entered without stopping the vehicle, till a masculine voice said, "Good morning, Miss March," and looking up she beheld one of Laurie's most elegant college friends. Fervently hoping that he would get out before she did, Amy utterly ignored the basket at her feet, and congratulating herself that she had on her new traveling dress, returned the young man's greeting with her usual suavity, and spirit. They got on excellently, for Amy's chief care was soon set at rest by learning that the gentleman would leave first, and she was chatting away in a peculiarly lofty strain when the lady got out. And stumbling to the door, she upset the basket, and oh horror! The lobster, in all its vulgar size and brilliancy, was revealed to the high-born eyes of a Tudor. "By Jove, she's forgotten her dinner!" cried the unconscious youth, poking the scarlet monster into its place with his cane and preparing to hand out the basket after the old lady. "Please don't, it's mine," murmured Amy, with a face nearly as red as her fish. "Oh, really? I beg pardon. It's an uncommonly fine one, isn't it?" said Tudor, with a great presence of mind and an air of sober interest that did credit to his breeding. Amy recovered herself in her breath, set her basket boldly on the seat, and said, laughing, Don't you wish you would have some of the salad he's going to make, and to see the charming young ladies who are to eat it? Now that was tact, for two of the ruling foibles, foible, a minor weakness or eccentricity in someone's character, the weaker part of a sword blade from the middle to the point. Foible, a weakness. Now that was fact, for two of the ruling foibles of the masculine mind were touched. The lobster was instantly surrounded by a halo of pleasing reminiscences. Good Lord. Reminiscences. The lobster was instantly surrounded by a halo of pleasing reminiscences, and curiosity about the charming young ladies diverted his mind from the comical mishap. I suppose he'll laugh and joke over it with Laurie, but I shan't see them. That's a comfort, thought Amy, as Tudor bowed and departed. She did not mention this meeting at home, though she discovered that thanks to the upset, her new dress was much damaged by the rivulets of dressing that meandered down the skirt, but went through with the preparations, which now seemed more irksome than before, and at 12 o'clock all was ready again. Feeling that the neighbors were interested in her movements, she wished to efface the memory of yesterday's failure by a grand success today. So she ordered the cherry bounce and drove away in state to meet and escort her guests to the banquet. There's a rumble. They're coming. I'll go onto the porch and meet them. It looks hospitable, and I want the poor child to have a good time after all her trouble, said Mrs. March, suiting the action to the word. But after one glance, she retired with an indescribable expression, for looking quite lost in the big carriage sat Amy and one young lady. Run, Beth, and help Hannah clear half the things off the table. It will be too absurd to put a luncheon for 12 before a single girl, cried Joe, hurrying away to the lower regions, too excited to stop even for a laugh. In came Amy, quite calm and delightfully cordial to the one guest who had kept her promise. The rest of the family, being of a dramatic turn, played their parts equally well, and Miss Elliot found them a most hilarious set, for it was impossible to control entirely the merriment which possessed them. The remodeled lunch being gaily partaken of, the studio and garden visited, and art decisions with enthusiasm. Amy ordered a buggy, alas for the elegant cherry bounce, and drove her friend quietly about the neighborhood till sunset, when the party went out. As she came walking in, looking very tired but as composed as ever, she observed that every vestige of the unfortunate fete had disappeared, except a suspicious pucker about the corners of Joe's mouth. You've had a lovely afternoon for your drive, dear, said Mother, as respectfully as if the whole 12 had come. Miss Elliot is a very sweet girl, and seemed to enjoy herself, I thought, observed Beth with the usual warmth. Could you spare me some of your cake? I really need some. I have so much company, and I can't make such delicious stuff as yours, asked Meg soberly. Take it all. I'm the only one here who likes sweet things, and it will mold before I can dispose of it, answered Amy, thinking with a sigh of the generous store she had laid in for such an end as this. It's a pity Laurie isn't here to help us, began Joe, as they sat down to ice cream and salad for the second time in 2 days. A warning look from her mother checked any further remarks, and the whole family ate in heroic silence till Mr. March mildly observed, Salad was one of the favorite dishes of the ancients, and Evelyn. Here a general explosion of laughter cut short the history of salads to the great surprise of the learned gentleman. Bundle everything into a basket and send it to the Hummels. Germans like messes. I'm sick of the sight of this, and there's no reason you should all die of a surfeit because I've been a fool, cried Amy, wiping her eyes. I thought I should have died when I saw you two girls rattling about in what you call it, like two little kernels in a very big nutshell, and mother waiting in state to receive the throng, sighed Joe, quite spent with laughter. I'm very sorry you were disappointed, dear, but we all did our best to satisfy you, said Mrs. March in a tone full of motherly regret. I am satisfied. I've done what I undertook, and it's not my fault that it failed. I comfort myself with that, said Amy with a little quiver in her voice. I thank you all very much for helping me, and I'll thank you still more if you won't allude to it for a month at least. No one did for several months, but the word fete always produced a general smile, and Laura's birthday gift to Amy was a tiny coral lobster in the shape of a charm for her watchguard.